talk about some of that legislation that has changed, and we know that overnight the frontline or the work that is going to. Sorry, I should say the legislation that is aimed at keeping our frontline workers safe passed through Parliament. The Minister for Logistics and Infrastructure, Bill Yan, had joined us earlier in the week and said that those assaults on police, paramedics, nurses, doctors, teachers, corrections officers, as well as retail and hospitality workers, bus and taxi drivers, that they want to stamp it out. They do not want to have a situation where this is continuing to happen. Now, as I say, my understanding is that legislation passed overnight. As I understand it, Selena, there was a division. You did vote with the government, but Chansey and Dheran abstained from voting. Is that the case?
No, they weren't actually in the chamber, Katie. How
come?
Well, we actually expected the legislation to be on Wednesday, so normally the legislation would go through in the morning. Obviously, we had GBD for people in the real world. That's General Business Day. That's usually when the opposition and the independents go through, and then you're on to basically government business again. So
are they not in the building?
I'm just answering about the timing of the legislation, Josh. So what happened is we were ready to go at 7 on the 7 p.m. That is on the Wednesday. There was a national commissioner that was in. There's an issue that's coming to our community, to all of our communities, that's going to be quite pertinent for the November sittings. So one of my members was meeting with that commissioner to be able to do our work as parliamentarians when it come back in that November sittings. And
this is absolute rubbish, Katie. Like, Labor are divided on this
excuse me,
issue.
I've been asked a question.
You're either in
I'm going
support
to
of the
answer the question
legislation
for Katie.
or you're not, because the reality is,
and the other member,
we all know when
Katie,
Parliament's
had an
sitting.
emergency that they were dealing with. That happens, unfortunately, a personal emergency.
This is a massive piece of legislation, right? And I mean, when you've got somebody like Chansey Paech who says that jailing is failing and he doesn't believe in mandatory sentencing, surely he would be there then.
Katie, Chansey spoke as the Shadow Attorney General on that.
But didn't vote on it?
We said that we would be supporting our workers and that we don't support the mandatory sentencing component, and that's from all of us as Labor members, because there is clear legal evidence that mandatory sentencing in any shape or form does not work. That's not Labor because we're a bleeding heart.
So
that's
did he
based
vote
on
on
legal
it?
experts.
Did Chansey vote on it?
Chansey was not in the chamber, but our Labor opposition supported the legislation.
Which I think is a good thing.
Yeah, we supported the legislation. We don't support the
really
mandatory sentencing component, Katie, but we support our workers.
Yeah,
so that's what we did.
I think that's an important
as a Labor
thing to
opposition.
point out, because I know that for you as the opposition leader, I'm sure that at different times you'll cop stick over what you do and
always.
don't support.
Yeah, always.
So I think it's important to point that out. But what I think is really important to point out is the fact that he wasn't there.
Our Labor opposition supported the legislation, Katie.
Are you disappointed he wasn't there?
There was a prior engagement which was not attached to what was happening in the chamber at the time.
Look, I guess from my perspective, I think, you've got a small team of 4.
Yeah, we do.
And you're trying really hard to get out there as the opposition leader and hold the government to account. I'd be a bit pissed off if my teammates weren't behind me.
Oh, we were behind that legislation. We were not behind the mandatory sentencing component. We still disagree with that, Katie, but we want to stand up strong for our territory workers, and that's what we did.
I've dominated that conversation there. What's everyone else want to say?
Chansey's out in the wilderness here. I mean, he's gone from being the deputy leader of the government to now being, effectively sidelined in the current Labor team, and I think he's just trying to now show that he's not going to stand up in regards to some of the things that he personally doesn't believe in, and it's just bizarre that you've got...
But he spoke on the legislation, Josh, so you can't say he's not standing up and talking about what's important to Territorians.
But you can't have it both ways, Selena. You either support the
Chansey,
legislation or you don't.
We've
Either
made the
support
point
the legislation
for Labor.
or you don't.
We've made the point of where our position was.
You made a key point of me not speaking over you now, Selena, and you're doing the same thing. At the end of the day, Chansey would have been in the Parliament. Now, when those bells ring, it doesn't matter. I've been having meetings myself. You get into the chamber and you vote on this important legislation. You're there to represent people. So for Chansey, he either didn't feel that his vote was important or he didn't want to represent the people on this issue. I mean, at the end of the day, he either supported it or he didn't. If he was in the chamber and just decided not to walk in, I mean, where does that leave Labor? They're divided on this issue. And on one hand, they want to support workers, but then on the other, their own former deputy won't even be in the room for the vote. It's bizarre.
Alex, what do you make of it all?
Well... look, I think the debate's sort of a bit of a distraction about who was or wasn't in the chamber. I mean, I actually think this component of the overall package that the CLP has been advancing this fortnight is probably one of the lesser...
less controversial, maybe?
Well, less controversial, but also less consequential. I mean, this sort of behaviour is already condemned by the courts. If you hock a loogie in the face of a police officer or a paramedic, you're already going to be in trouble. I haven't seen many circumstances where there has been an assault on a frontline worker where the sentence imposed has been less than what the mandatory minimums.
Look, I know we've had different feedback from the association, from the police association, for example, and I don't know. Like, I can't give you a case.
I think with police in Alice Springs, unfortunately, this happens very often, and quite often those police are saying, "I'm being assaulted, I'm being spat on," and then I'm picking up the same person the very next week. So that's where this is coming from. People just feel as though they're not being protected, as though they're not being heard when they're working, and what we're doing is strengthening those laws so people now know they are protected. And if they are assaulted, if they are spat on, there will be an offence and there will be a penalty attached
Katie,
to it.
we actually extended, when Labor was in government, we extended the definition of assault on our frontline emergency workers to include spitting. So that was a new section that we inserted into that piece of legislation to strengthen that. Obviously, it was a very unusual time. We're coming out of a global pandemic, and we knew what the serious harm that could be from, that really disgusting type of behaviour to then, our frontline workers and protect them. So we extended that definition for spitting. What the CLP has done is created this mandatory sentencing so the courts cannot look at an individual case. It takes away the discretionary powers for them. That's now the changes, and that's what we supported.
If anyone is assaulting a frontline worker, though, shouldn't they get in big trouble for it?
Absolutely, and that's why
they should. Absolutely,
and this is why
face the
we've done
consequences.
this. There needs to be consequences attached to it, and that's what we've ensured there's now is a minimum mandatory.